Okay, we're dealing with a handout today. You guys will find it under your classroom, and along with the questions, okay? So, first transcontinental railroad stretched from the east coast of the United States to the west coast. Again, the reason it started in Omaha, Nebraska was because you already got trains running in the east, okay? So it's not the first train ever built, okay?
That happened in 1966.
No longer would people travel in long wagon trains that took months to reach California. Okay? They could now travel faster and safer and cheaper by train. In addition to people, things like mail, supplies, and trade goods could now be shipped across the country in just a few days. Remember, we talked about it took about 10 days to go from New York to California as opposed to 3 months in a wagon. That's a big difference. Okay? This railroad was built between 1863 and 1869. Okay? And oddly enough, it covered 1,776 miles. 1776. Isn't that cool?
Oh.
That's weird. Okay. All right. The first talk of a transcontinental railroad started way back in 1830. One of the first promoters of the railroad was a merchant named Isa Whitney. And he tried hard for many years to get Congress to pass an act to build the railroad, but failed. He couldn't get them to do it. However, in 1860, Theodore Jewett began to lobby for a railroad. And he surveyed the Sierra Nevada mountains, and he found a pass where a railroad could be built. Okay? Because you think about it, we're trying to convince someone to build a railroad over land that has a lot of times hasn't been explored, has not. We're not 100% sure that we can do that. Okay? There was 2 main routes along which people wanted the first railroad to be built. One route was called the Central Route, and it followed much of the same route as the Oregon Trail. It would begin in Omaha, Nebraska, and end in Sacramento, California. The other route was the Southern Route, and this route would stretch across Texas, New Mexico, and end up in Los Angeles, California. Okay? Anybody remember which one they eventually chose? What was it?
Omaha, Nebraska, because you just said that.
Yep, it was the one that started in Nebraska. Okay, the Central Route was the one that was eventually chosen. Okay, so it went to Sacramento, California, and that's probably one of the Sacramento, California is the capital of California. Okay, all right, and you see the map here. It shows you. And I'm going to pull you up in one better where the color is better that you can see. You'll see it a little bit better. In 1862, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Pacific Railroad Act into law. Okay? And this act said that there were 2 main railroad lines. The Central Pacific Railroad would come from California, and the Union Pacific would come from the Midwest. And they would meet somewhere in the middle. Anybody remember how did they get the goods for the one coming out, the Central coming out of California? How did they get the goods there to start building?
So they took all the equipment that they needed, put it on a boat, went all the way under South America, came up and went all the way to California.
Okay, came kind of hit the in South America and worked it up from there. But yeah, that's pretty amazing. It had to go on quite a journey before they could even start building the railroad coming that way, which you're going to see. They didn't cover as much ground as the other did.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
dear.
I think it was like lopsided, where they only got here, what they got.
Other than the Panama Canal, is there any, well, I don't know if I said that right, but is there any other thing through?
No, the Panama Canal
Magellan
cuts
Strait.
through. It's the cut through. And it wasn't there now. Okay.
Yeah, yes,
All right.
yes.
The act gives the railroad companies land where they could build the railroad. It also paid them for each mile that they built. They were paid more money for miles of track built in the mountains versus that of the tracks built on the flat plain. Why do you think that might be, Rhett,
Um,
as you're playing your pencil?
what might be? The,
Why do you think they paid them more to go through the mountains than they did just to build it on flat land?
harder work.
Harder work? Yeah,
I mean,
okay.
because they have to like blow through.
Yeah.
Dynamite!
Dynamite, what do you think, Parker?
Because there's like more raw trees that.
Okay,
Like,
You can use the trees.
it's Mr. Sizemore, it's rougher terrain, and you have to find a way to get through it, and it's gonna be harder work, and
You
you
go around
have to clear it all out.
yeah, going through the
Go
mountains, you've either got to figure out how to go around it, go over it, or go through it. Okay?
Through the mountain.
So there's more to it, okay? Building a railroad was tough, hard work. Weather conditions were especially tough in the mountains during the winter time. Okay, they didn't quit work just because it was winter. Okay? A lot of times the only way to travel over the mountain was to go through the mountains. Okay? And that was by blasting a tunnel. The Central Pacific Railroad had to blast a number of tunnels through the Sierra Nevada mountains, which is why it took them longer to achieve a distance. The longest tunnel built was 1,659 feet long.
That's almost a
That's a
mile.
long tunnel.
No.
It took time to build. It took a long time to build tunnels. Hey, listen to this. They were able to blast and dig it out about a foot per day on average.
Oh, that's not good. I mean, think about it.
They gotta make this is they gotta make this and they gotta sure it up and all that. Okay.
Before diesel, going through tunnels was pretty bad because steam would go up, right?
When the Central Pacific Railroad had to deal with mountains and snow, the Union Pacific Railroad had to deal with Native Americans. Okay? Remember, the Union Pacific is coming from Nebraska. Okay? As Native Americans came to realize the threat to their way of life that the Iron Horse was going to bring, they began to raid railroad work sites. Also, a lot of the land grants was granted to the railroad by the government had actually already under treaty been given to the Native Americans. Okay? Yeah, exactly.
What about the Native Americans? And they're probably going to kill some of those before we kill them.
The majority of the workers on the Union Pacific Railroad was Irish laborers, many of who had served in both the Union and Confederate Army. In Utah, a lot of the track was built by Mormon workers, and most of the Central Pacific Railroad was actually being built by Chinese immigrants. Remember, they sent a boat to China and brought back something like 7,500 Chinese for nothing but to build that railroad. Okay? They were hard workers and paid them. How much did they pay them? Anybody remember?
$1 a day.
$1 a day.
Wait,
Like, what would they do when they were young? Would they just let them live there?
Yeah, they stayed. Some of them stayed, some of them probably went back.
I'd go back.
So, I bet they learned a lot of cuss words and bad words at those camps.
Well, they probably already had them, you just didn't know it because they spoke them in Chinese. Okay? All right. The Golden Spike. We talked about this the other day too. The two railroads finally met at Promontory Summit in Utah on May the 10th, 1869. This is when Leland Stanford, the governor of California and president of the Central Pacific Railroad, think maybe he used his power to get a little more power, drove in the last spike. This final spike was called the Golden Spike, or the final spike. And you can see it today at Sanford University in California. Now you know who it was named after. Okay? Okay? Interesting facts about the first transcontinental railroad. The Pony Express traveled a similar route to the Central route and helped provide that route that was passable in the winter. Okay? So they had figured out a way through the mountains even in the wintertime. So that came in handy for the railroad guys. The Transcontinental Railroad was also called the Pacific Railroad or the Overland Route. The total length of the first transcontinental railroad was 1,776 miles, 1776.
I bet you when they came over, they were saying how it was gonna be really nice to get to come to America. You get to do a little bit of labor, and then you get to.
You can pay-
Oh, my guess is they knew exactly what they were getting into.
When they get here, you get to do a little.
The Central Pacific Railroad was controlled by 4 men called the Big Four. They were Leland Stanford, Collis P. Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker. Who did they leave out?
Some of the rich boys.
Thomas Durant. Because Durant, remember, he's the head of the Union Pacific, but he gets caught doing some illegal stuff, so. Okay. It was later in November 1869 when the Central Pacific connected San Francisco to Sacramento. Okay, so it was late November, 1869, when they finally get it completed. All right. Okay, we're gonna look at some pictures. I'm gonna try to get them sent to you.
Honestly, that was
Get the link sent to you so you can look at them also.
actually
Ah.
honestly